Appreciate you guys for coming into my session this morning. I know you have a bunch of options, so I appreciate it. My name is Mar-Tang. I'm a solutions engineer here with CyberArk. I've been with CyberArk for about 2 years now. Worked all over the country, been with many different industry verticals. So I've been in the industry for about 10 years now. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, not only about CyberArk, but privilege in general. So CyberArk, our main focus as a company, as a security company, is really focused on privilege. And today's session is going to get into, again, why does privilege matter, right? Where is it? And it really is everywhere. We'll talk about some of the risks that come inherent to privilege. What have we seen out there? How can CyberArk help, right? What is our approach to risk mitigation from a privilege perspective? And then what are some immediate wins that you can get right out of the gate, right? What can you do coming out of here? So let's start. So our friend Robert Mueller is credited with saying this, right? There are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. Even that is emerging into one category, those that have been hacked and will be again. So it's kind of morbid if you think about it, but if we look at the last, I mean, we can say 2012, but even beyond that, right? How many breaches have occurred time and time again? We need to think about, okay, well, why does this keep happening? And we have technologies, and of course, security should be a layered defense. We have perimeter defenses, we have endpoint defenses, we have things monitoring email, maybe even more sophisticated technologies that are monitoring packets, intrusion detection systems, etc. Yet these attacks continue to occur. So we know in security that nothing is ever 100%, but how close can we get to that? And so again, we sit here and we scratch our heads and we think, why does this continue to happen? Our friends at Mandiant are credited to this quote, right, where 100% of breaches involved stolen credentials. APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat Intruders, prefer to leverage privileged accounts where possible, such as domain administrators, service accounts with domain privileges, local administrator accounts, and privileged user accounts. And really the reason being is that when an attack or an intrusion starts, an intrusion and a quote-unquote attack never occurs in one shot, right? You don't get a foothold inside the environment and say, jackpot, everything I need is right here. You have to move laterally. In order to do that, you need the right credentials and you need to be able to escalate those privileges to get to other areas on the network. It's just the nature of the beast. Has anyone in this room done any type of pen testing or have gone through a penetration test? Awesome. Oh, great. A lot of people. That's awesome. So you guys know what I'm talking about. Now, when we talk about the attack surface, we gotta, again, we're talking about why things are happening, privilege credentials, and we gotta then realize that this is where privilege is everywhere, and how does that matter? And we gotta think about the identities inside our environment. So who are those users, right? And you have the folks who actually work for your organizations here. But it goes way beyond that. We're going to be looking at service accounts and database administrators, people on the Windows team, the Unix team, the networking team, and they'll have different accounts and different facets, right? You'll have some people who, of course, naturally have domain admin privileges. Some people may have access to different databases. Obviously, your DBAs will, but your developers might as well. Who has access to root accounts, etc., and then of course service accounts in the Windows environment. But it goes even a little bit beyond that. Think about the vendors and the people entering your environment. Folks like us, right? Vendors, anyone coming in, contractors, third parties. These could be temporary folks, they could be permanent folks, it could be contracted. These are identities you still need to be aware of because they may also have privileges. And to throw it off, or to complicate things even a little bit more, privileged accounts are not necessarily only inherent to actual human identities. A lot of times, applications need to leverage privilege. So applications, different technologies you might be using, custom applications, scripts, and things like that oftentimes leverage different types of privileged accounts. So when we take a look at this, we start saying, okay, yeah, we're expanding not only just the normal identities, but the privileged identities themselves. And I've been inside environments, speaking from experience, where we have users who have their regular account, maybe they have a privileged account, like an admin account, and then they maybe even have a third admin account for something else, maybe a different type of technology. So you end up having multiple accounts, and that becomes really hard to track. And then when things are hard to track, what are users going to do? They're not going to change their passwords, they're going to keep it simple, or maybe even use the same password across the board. However, that's risky. Why is that risky? Well, again, this is how we're going to see our friends or our threat actors here start to behave. It's funny because I like to, not that I throw LinkedIn under the bus, but due to the nature of the times that we're in, who in here, we talked a little bit about who was doing pen testing, who in here has a LinkedIn account? Yeah, almost everybody, right? Whether or not you have Facebook or not, that may or may be relevant or not, but the point is that there's a lot of information out there that's currently present. And what we see, what we've been seeing, and it's interesting because we spoke a little bit about it this morning in the opening session, that threat actors are sharing information a lot of times better than us. And what we've seen, though, after going in and talked and done postmortems and assisted with postmortems, is that reconnaissance is always the first step in the attack. You have to know who you're attacking. And a lot of times this is being done either through social media or whatever information can be found on the internet. So a threat actor may go and see, well, who's working for your organization, right? Go and take a look at your LinkedIn or their LinkedIns and say, this person is working on the network team or the database team, and may infer that they have access to certain types of information. So let's just say that a threat actor crafts a very specific type of email, something like phishing email, which, by the way, I would argue is probably the number one way that users are getting, that threat actors are getting in. The reason being is that it works. I was part of a very large breach back in 2011, and that's how the threat actors got in. They crafted a very specific email, attached in an Excel spreadsheet with a 0-day Adobe Flash vulnerability as part of it, sent it in. It ended up in the user's spam box. The user went into the spam box, right? Went into the spam box, opened it up, and then enabled the macro so that the macro could run, which then installed some malware. So phishing is definitely number one. That's why we often, kind of reference it. So you're going to have threat actors who are going to be doing reconnaissance, crafting messages that really, really look legitimate to try and fool your end users. And you can do as much user education as you want, and I encourage you to do that because something is better than nothing. But all it takes is one out of even an organization of like 40,000, right? What they'll do next is try and retrieve whatever credentials are on that machine. So we're talking about using either some type of, could be malicious code, it could be just tools that are going to scrape something out of memory. So it could be a local admin password. A lot of times they'll target executives for that very reason, because executives often have more privileges than they might need because of one reason or the other. Maybe they need to install a printer, or they need to do something, and now they have the access. So they'll target that, but regardless of the fact of who the identity is, they've already done the research. They're going to craft that message, they're going to run, and they're going to try and scrape a credential out. Now let's just say it's a local admin credential. What they're going to do next is now use that to move laterally somewhere else. Now in this example, right, they'll use and move to another machine that maybe the help desk got on that used. Because essentially what's going to happen is when a threat actor uses and exploits an attack like this called pass to hash, they'll scrape a password hash out of memory, out of the Windows environment, use that hash to then authenticate somewhere else, so now they're on another server. Then they'll just repeat that process, see if they can get any credentials, move to another platform, and essentially escalate until, right, they maybe get to a server that has higher credentials, something like domain admin. So in my example, in the breach that I was a part of, the threat actor took the local admin password, moved laterally several times, ended up getting onto an Exchange server, moved their malware over to the Exchange server, ran the malware there, and dumped a boatload of hashes off the Exchange server because the Exchange server had not been reset or restarted. So unless you restart a machine, those passwords are going to remain, the hashes are going to remain in memory. So then they got a bunch of other credentials, one of which was a domain admin credential. So they get domain admin, and then they can ultimately get onto a domain controller. And this is where damage really starts to take effect. Because once you get on a domain controller with the domain admin credential, you can issue what is known as a golden ticket attack. Now, if we're familiar with the Windows environment works with the way authentication happens is based on a system called Kerberos. It's based off the three-headed dog that I think guarded Hades, right? Because of this, and it's reference really just around the process of how it works. But a golden ticket attack refers to when a threat actor issues their own Kerberos ticket, which essentially means that they're using a known process to issue and act like a trusted identity inside the environment. That's bad, because not only is it going to look legitimate, but your existing controls may not even actually pick that up, because again, it's exploiting a process that happens all the time. So once that happens and a golden ticket attack is perpetrated, they can essentially get anywhere on the Windows environment. And what I've seen, based on my experience, especially in healthcare, is that they may want to mass distribute something like ransomware. Once it's on all these systems, execute it, and now we have a mass encryption. That's just one example of what's something that could happen. But the point is that the escalation of privileges that occurred started from different lower tier asset, moved to a middle tier asset, and then it got to a highly valued asset, in this case a domain controller, to which then could then continue from there. And yeah, screw TweetDuck. So we talked about domain controllers again and why they're really super delicious, because they have so much power inside the environment. I love Reese's. They have so much power inside the environment. So this is an example right off the bat, right? If you have a Windows environment, an example of an HVA high value asset that you definitely want to protect because of the power that it has inside your own environment. But we're actually moving towards a different paradigm shift. So what are we seeing now with moving away from quote-unquote traditional environments, now with a step towards the cloud, right? So if we look at the way threat actors were perpetrating, right, they'd get in, and maybe traditionally they might exfiltrate data, like I was talking about before, they might try and issue like a ransomware attack to get some information. But now, when we're moving things to the cloud, and we can just, again, take a survey here. How many of you folks are in your cloud journey have assets deployed in the cloud or are using Azure or AWS or things like that? A couple, okay. We're definitely seeing a lot more and more in that. And now what we have to be aware of, right, and we're talking again about where privilege exists. Not only does it exist in the Windows environment and traditional environments, but it exists in the cloud as well. So think about the accounts that are going to manage your AWS, your Azure, your GCP, or any other cloud environment. Those accounts are very highly privileged, very critical. It almost essentially is the doorway to another data center. How are you managing those credentials today? If a threat actor exploits those somehow, God forbid, an admin has, for example, the AWS root account written in a notepad file, right? I could, I could go on LinkedIn, going back to the examples that we've been talking about, go on LinkedIn, see who your cloud admins are. Try and exploit them, send them a phishing memo, get some type of malware, remote access tool, whatever, and then scour and see what they have, what credentials they have on their desktop. Oh, the AWS root account? Perfect. Now I can use that account to get into your AWS environment and do some real damage, whether it's duplicating machines or exfiltrating data off of there. So this is also something that we need to be aware of, that there are privileged accounts out there, not only just in your traditional environments, but now into your new virtual data centers. Here's where else, again, what are we seeing and where are we moving towards? A lot of automation, okay? So as we move towards an environment that is, if we look at traditionally where we were, we had monolithic applications. Several years ago, VMware started to really take off, and now that's kind of a standard. What we're seeing now is that we're actually moving towards containerization and microservices. Especially with a push towards the cloud, really, just to try and make sure that we're saving money and being most effective in our processes. The challenge is that all these tools now that are helping you manage your automation environment, things like Docker, that's helping you manage the actual containers. Jenkins, that's actually helping with the automation and the build processes. Ansible, your infrastructure as code, all that. All these tools, these automation tools, need access to secrets. And where do those secrets live? A lot of times they could either be, all these tools, to be fair, have their own secret store, which helps. But a lot of times that is challenging because now you have several different tools that are going to be doing that. You have this tool with this vault, this tool with that vault. So it can be challenging. It can also, again, these credentials, for someone who needs to manage all this, they may actually keep this in a central location on their desktop or something like that, which we don't want to do. What we've seen, and where it's actually a little bit relevant today, is if you're using some type of source code repository, something like GitHub or anything like that, a lot of the breaches, or some of the breaches that have transpired, actually had this type of vulnerability. And I say vulnerability, it's that because it's been exploited, but where there are, in this case, for example, the AWS key hosted in that source code repository. And if it's out there and this then gets breached, well, guess what? Now you have a threat actor who can potentially get a very highly privileged credential to a very, very large subset of assets in the cloud. So this all sounds pretty morbid, but really it's just talking about the lay of the land, right? What is the current environment and what are the challenges that we're dealing with? So for us, over the years, we've always been focused, we being CyberArk, being focused on privilege and managing privileged accounts. And for us, it's really about making and operationalizing the risks that can be mitigated by our security teams and our operations teams so that it's no longer painful, but it's a little bit easier so that you can do it and be a little bit more secure. Most of our customers start out with this journey up here in this left-hand corner. It's our core privileged account security solution. It's really focused on credential management, session isolation and recording, and analytics. So I was talking to a couple folks who stopped by the table today to say, what exactly does that mean? And it's tough, right? Because, in 30 seconds, how do I give you a quick drive-by of what's important and how to do it? But our Enterprise Password Vault, really, its main goal is to take all those privileged accounts, keep it in a central location. What we'll do is monitor who's accessing it, automate the rotation of that. So if you think about the scenario before where we had an environment that had all the same local admin account across the board, and if a threat actor enumerates one password through malware or whatever, and then executes that hash-to-hash attack, it's very easily to move laterally. If we have an environment where there's a strong random unique password across the board, well, it's not as easy to move laterally anymore. So our focus would be to make sure we have strong random unique passwords across any piece of infrastructure, whether it's Windows or Unix, your domains, your network infrastructure, for example. All that should be strong random unique. And with something like a password vault, you can do that. Now, passwords, yes?
What about all those other secrets that you talk about, like certificates or keys,
Yep.
et cetera? Are those managed in that vault?
So the vault is only going to manage accounts. We can manage and protect certificates. We can put anything we want in the vault. However, we're not going to be rotating like certificate keys or private keys, things like that. That would just out of scope for us.
Okay.
But we can secure things securely. Oddly enough, it's funny you mentioned that because what we noticed, or why we got into this business, is that we had that secure vault, and users were taking password spreadsheets and putting it in the vault. And we said, if you're doing this, why don't we just automate the process and put the passwords in there for you? So that's kind of how we ended up doing this. But the accounts themselves are never static, right? You're going to be using them. So privileged accounts end up stemming into privileged sessions. So you might take a domain admin account and connect to a domain controller. You might take an enable account and connect to a router, or the SA account and connect into a database. If you're going to be doing that, you should be monitoring that session because a lot can happen and transpire in that session. So our approach would be, we're probably familiar with your traditional Bastion host. We take a similar type of approach where we have a jump server, a secure man in the middle to actually broker and monitor that session. So what that allows is that your administrators now can come to the vault, check out an account, connect somewhere, and have everything recorded. Why that's valuable is now you can no longer directly connect to an HVA without making sure that your access is granted and tracked, And if someone goes into some type of asset, makes a change, a routing change, drops a table on a database, you can quickly see and review and say, what happened? Oh, Jay went in, connected, and did this. No worries. Now we know what he did. There's no finger pointing anymore, and now we can go and revert that change and bring things back online. Analytics. So that's the third part. Analytics really plays an important part when it comes to privileged accounts, because if you know certain privileged accounts are going to be used in a certain way, you can establish a baseline, and you'll want to know when that baseline deviates from known good. So that's what our analytics engine does. Moving on from there, we talked a little bit about application. So application security has many different facets, but applications oftentimes need privilege. So an example of this is any tool that's going to be going out and scanning an environment, oftentimes will need a privilege account to do so. Or like I mentioned before, your scripts. Your scripts are going to be doing jobs, service accounts, things like that, all require privilege. So what we'd want to do is actually grant identity. So we talked about the human identity. What we'd want to do with applications is grant applications an identity as well, so we know which applications have access to what. This ensures that only the right applications get access to those credentials, and not something rogue. And this way too, we can also continually rotate credentials that traditionally may not have been rotated because we were afraid of maybe breaking something. Finally, right, when we're talking about, we talked a little bit about malicious code and scraping credentials out of memory. How do we stop that? Well, there's different ways. I mean, there's plenty of different tools out there that can help on the endpoint. Our approach really is by limiting local administrative rights and doing application control. So if you think about your users, how many of your users have local admin rights? Can they escalate their privilege to local admin? Can they install applications? All that is risk that could potentially be mitigated. So what we'd want to do is control local admin, remove that away, and only grant it to users who need it. So follow essentially a least privilege model. So I'm a developer, I need to escalate my privilege for Visual Studio, but only that. I don't need to mess with the Windows firewall or do something else. So by being able to control privilege and control applications on the endpoint, now we can actually limit and contain any potential infection. So we want to, an approach that we take is limit privilege and manage privilege in your traditional environments with analytics and credential management, limit privilege with your applications, and limit privilege on the endpoint. And that journey really depends on where you guys want to take it. So you might be thinking, well, now what, right? So we know what threat actors are going after, we know privilege accounts exist, we know where they are. What can we do? So I mentioned where we'd like to partner with some of you guys and what you can do coming right out of here. What you can do with CyberArk really is focus on these types of direct wins. So making sure that multi-factor authentication occurs before anyone gets access to privileged accounts. With us, because we'll be managing the facilitation of that, we can integrate with your multi-factor products and make sure that inherently anyone who needs access to privileged accounts can multi-factor first and then get that access. Like I mentioned, we're going to always continually rotate to mitigate the attacks of pass the hash. And then what we're going to do is we're going to also turn off that direct access to tier 0 and between tier 0 and tier 1 assets. So if you're familiar with Microsoft Red Forest really separates, again, tier 2, tier 1, tier 0, and can we have credential boundaries and make sure that we can't move to different tiers? We can help with that, the way we manage the accounts and also isolate and use our jump server. We've had a lot of success with that. And then, of course, right, we want to have that flavor of behavior analytics, because anytime we see something that anomalous happens, we can maybe issue a credential rotation right away if we think a credential might have been stolen or something like that. Now, this is usually, again, it kind of begs the question, all right, these are wins, but where do we start? What's going to give us the most bang for a buck? So with security, it's always about mitigating the most risk and starting down that path and having a way to operationalize and have a process that's going to be successful. So what we'd like to do is focus on things that really do the most damage first. So we want to focus on really these top 3 right here. So eliminate irreversible network takeover attacks. Focus on your Windows environment. Focus on those domain controllers. Make sure that those domain admin accounts are accounted for, rotated, and make sure that domain controllers are protected with that secure jump host. By doing that, you can mitigate a ton of risk right off the bat. Similarly, give me some quick time check here. Similarly, what we'd want to do next is control and secure the infrastructure backdoor accounts. So we want to make sure that the local admins are all different. Any other additional local admins are changed and being rotated. Your root accounts are all different. Your SA accounts, all that. Anything, every piece of infrastructure is going to have a local admin account. It's just the nature of the beast. Even my router at home has it. So we'll want to make sure that we are facilitating and managing those. Limiting the lateral movement, right? So in doing these, you should essentially accomplish limiting the lateral movement, but if you can stop the threat actors by either stopping how they're stealing the credentials, taking them out of memory, taking them from the Chrome browser, that's important too, because then you're actually, again, that layered defense really starts to come into play. SSH keys. So those of you with a large Unix footprint, if you're using SSH keys, if you're not managing the SSH keys, something to think about. I've seen a lot of environments where there's orphan private keys and just keys that are being used across the board. And again, of course, similarly to passwords, if one key gets exploited, you can then move to any other system that has the same key pair. Third-party credentials, this is important too. That's a big one. That's where we're talking about the vulnerability scanners and making sure that the applications have the right access. Luckily, we have a lot of integration, so if you have technologies out there, more often than not, we'll have an integration there.
So you said though on the SSH keys,
Mm-hmm.
you do or don't manage?
No, we do manage. The keys we do. The SSH keys we do. But certificate rotation, we don't.
Okay, all right.
Exactly.
That's half the picture, which is really good.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times, so the same type of concept with rotation.
That's all the picture, actually. I take it back.
Yeah. No, that's fine. But yeah, so for example, like with the SSH keys, you're going to want to rotate them and track it. We do the same thing with passwords. We treat it very similar. So yeah, with that type of process in play, we'll at least start to get some quick wins. And that's even enough to, within the first 6 months, if you're just going to start doing that, can really help step up your security posture. If we go back to and reference what the breach I was a part of back in 2011, the first step that the red actor did was enumerate that local admin password and move laterally. If that local admin password was not the same across the board, they would have had to jump through a lot more hoops. They definitely could not have moved laterally that way. So that's just an example, again, that why I feel so passionate about this, because it's such an easy win, but it's not easy if you don't have a streamlined process around it. So I understand, but that's why, again, we want to try and partner with you guys. So I mentioned at the beginning, and I just had a time check, so I'm going to start to wrap up here. What's something that you can do immediately to get a quick win? So we offer a tool here called Discovery and Audit. Its main focus is really to help you understand what the risk footprint in the organization is today. So this is a free tool. If you're curious about it, please come see us at the booth and we can hook you up with more information. But essentially what it is you download it, it's an application, it goes out and crawls the Windows and Unix environment. At the end of that scan, you get a nice report on all the metrics around the accounts that we found. So how many privileged accounts did we find? Are they part of the domain admin groups? Are they local accounts? Are they part of this group or that group? When was the last time the password was changed? Has it even been used in a long time? Are they enabled? Are they disabled? If they're disabled, maybe we just get rid of them. Right? These are really, again, quick wins that you can get just from running a quick report that normally would have been manual, because unless you're going to run and actually query all your AD and stuff, it might be a little bit painful. So what we're also going to do is provide you a risk map. So essentially give you, when we talked about pass the hash and things like that, we're going to give you a map that shows the actual lateral movement that a threat actor could have if they exploited a specific machine. So if they popped one machine, what else would they have access to? Would they have access to a domain controller? And this really helps prioritize, because now we'll actually see what are the most riskiest accounts in the environment and where should we start on our journey. So we'll also find other neat things. Again, we'll find SSH keys, those key pairs. We'll find out, are there secrets or hard-coded credentials in like IIS config files and things like that. So definitely a very powerful tool that a lot of our customers will run right at the bat just to see what their risk footprint is, because you know what? You don't know what you don't know. So if we can help you by assisting you with this, we'd love to do that. Questions? Yeah.
You also look into the VMware environment, the administrative passwords and things like that?
So we can get into the ESX servers with the scan because we leverage a root account, but outside of Windows, Linux, and things like that, and local SQL, it's limited to that. So, any other questions about?
Do you guys do any kind of audits of the passwords themselves?
Meaning?
Like complexity, or the easy, or weak, strong?
So that we don't do that. What we'll look at is how often the password should be changed. So we'll see if you have a password policy that say, hey, we want to rotate this every 90 days. We'll see how many passwords exceed that and show you how many are out of compliance. As far as complexity goes, we'll take that complexity into account when we actually start to rotate passwords, and we'll make sure that we set them accordingly.
Okay, so you enforce policy.
We enforce policy, right, exactly,
That works too.
exactly. So, but I do highly encourage everyone in the room, again, this is something that you can help with, and we'll help you run this. If you're not sure where you stand today and you want to see exactly what that risk footprint is, please let us know and, help you out. So if there's any questions on CyberArk, or if you guys want to talk a little bit more about that breach, again, we can continue to talk about that, but that's all I had. So I appreciate you guys coming in this morning, and we'd love to see you at the booth, so stop by. We have some yo-yos and some toys that you guys can pick up and play with, so appreciate it. All right.
I'm a Linux guy.
Yeah.
This whole idea of is Microsoft just not clearing out this memory, or what's it? Why the heck is this sitting there?
Yeah. I mean, it was, I think as of in 2016, I think some Windows 10, some of that vulnerability goes away, especially with stronger passwords. You could do it. You could break, like, for example, the traditional environments, you had like a 15-character password, then the hash was like protected or a little bit more secure, but who's going to remember that? That was the problem, is that, all that automation, all that work, you're asking your end users to do that or your administrators to do that. It's too tough. And especially in the server environment, when you're not restarting those machines very often and those passwords are just sitting there, the best way to mitigate that risk is just continually rotate those passwords.
Right. So they just leave them in memory. I guess I'm.
Yeah. And not only that, like there were tools outside of your malware.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, outside of your traditional malware, there are also tools like Windows Credential Editor that can do the same thing. They can take passwords out of memory. What we also see too is it's not just that. Users are using the same password across the board. They shouldn't be. We hope that they're not, right?
That's ridiculous. I mean, I know the difference, and I do it just because unless you're using the password manager, and you want to teach 2,000, 3,000, 20,000 people how to use a password manager, nobody's going to do that. So that's just what's going to happen. You're either going to automate it for them, or that's what's
Right. I mean, and we can sit here as security professionals and say it's crazy, and it is, right? But I've been in environments where, that's been the case. I've seen passwords not change for 15 years, and longer than that, right? Just due to the nature of the beast. And it's no one's fault, right? It's just coming to terms with what we're dealing with as organizations. Different organizations have different challenges, and it's up to us to understand those challenges and try and meet them and work in a process that's going to not only make us more secure, but not impede on the business and operationalize it as well. So, but I appreciate your comments. I completely hear you. So, any other questions or comments? Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.